Welcome back, everyone. It's been a really fantastic day so far of conversations, and when we put these things together, you sort of have a vague sense of how it's going to go, and you have hopes it'll turn out as well as you imagine. And I have to say that just the conversations and the way that things have been intersecting have really exceeded my expectations. So thank you all for these really terrific papers. So we've got one final session, and then we'll have a very short wrap-up just to kind of tie some themes together. So I hope you'll stick around for that. That'll happen immediately after this one, after which we'll all convene across the street in the museum for some refreshment. So there'll be a mass exodus following the wrap-up. But for now, I'm very pleased to turn things over for our final session, which is lessons learned, opportunities for the future. So we've talked a lot about opportunities to connect with women and folks at different ages and career stages. But one of the things that has really struck me is the kind of intergenerational aspects of this conversation, and maybe we can talk more about that. And I think that this panel, which is opportunities for the future, is really going to get to the heart of that. And to lead this conversation, I'm very pleased to introduce Michelle Francel, who helped to put this event together with me. So thank you, Michelle, for your work in doing that. So Michelle is the Frank B. Mallory Professor of Chemistry at Bryn Mawr College, as well as an adjunct scholar of the Vatican Observatory. And her research interests range from the structures of topologically intriguing molecules to the history of chemistry. Her essays on science, culture, and policy appear regularly in Nature Chemistry, and her most recent book is Steeped, The Chemistry of Tea, which is forthcoming from the Royal Society of Chemistry Press. So if you have questions about tea, we should have had a tea party. Why didn't we do that? Next time. Anyway, please join me in welcoming Michelle and the rest of the panelists for the last session to the stage.
Now I'm going to try to juggle everything up here, too. There we go. But at least I already have my glasses on, so that helps. So I really want to thank Andreasen and the APS for the invitation to participate in this conference. It was really great fun to organize it. It's been wonderful to watch it sort of all come off the page and become real in front of me. I'm really excited about this panel in particular, which considers the intersection between policy and persistence, the places where lived experience meets institutional and systematic practice, and across the many phases of women's careers. And at first glance, it might be obvious why the papers in this panel are of interest to me, given the color of my hair. At this point, I have been a young woman in a very small town in the rural Midwest, interested in science, and that interest fueled by museums. The closest one was about a 2-hour drive away, and librarians, so I'm grateful to them always. I've been a very junior scientist at a time when I was almost the only woman in my field and struggling with the sudden death of a spouse in my first year on the tenure track. I've been a tenured mid-career scientist trying to juggle children and a burgeoning career. And now I've been a senior woman trying to change fields, from computational chemistry to topology and differential geometry, and to broaden my work into the philosophy and history of chemistry. Support was spotty all along this path and generally ad hoc. And ad hoc supports generally mean negotiating, which carry a hidden cost. So I'm interested to hear from our speakers who are going to cover the gamut of women's careers from beginning to end, and to think about what we might do in terms of the policies. What effect do they have? What are we doing to encourage women all along their paths? So our first paper is from Meytal, Eran, Jona, is an organizational sociologist and gender expert who heads the Diversity and Inclusion Office at the Weizmann Institute of Science. Her areas of research are gender and family issues in the armed forces and academia, diversity and inclusion in academia, women's careers in STEM fields. She chairs the Genera Network, which promotes gender equality in physics in European institutions. Yossi, who is here to answer questions, Meytal is going to give the talk, is a professor in the Faculty of Physics at Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel. He's a theorist, like I am, working in the field of high-energy physics. He has published over 170 papers in scientific journals and 2 books. He recently served as a member of the Scientific Policy Committee of CERN, the European Organization for Particle Physics Research, and since 2015, he's been carrying out research on gender in physics in collaboration with Dr. Eran Jones. Please welcome Dr. Eran Jones.
Thank you very much. We want to thank the American Philosophical Society for the invitation to present our research today to you. We came all the way from Israel, so quite a long trip, Yossi and myself. So I'll start with our collaboration. So Yossi is a physicist, theoretical particle physics. I'm a sociologist, mainly interested in gender studies. And 8 years ago, we started this project of trying to study together women in physics. So I think it was, the starting point was Yossi's interest in understanding why so few women pursue an academic career in physics. And for the last 8 years, we are studying it together, and we have a kind of agreement that when the conference is mainly based on social sciences, I will present, and when the conference is mainly based on physics, so he will present. So we are traveling around the world. We've been in Africa, in few European countries, and in the United States, and this agreement lasts. So I will be presenting, but he'll be happy also to answer any questions, and we're doing it really together. So this is the main important issue. So since we have a very short time, I'm going to be focused on one of the research questions from a very, from a larger, I would say, project. And in this specific project, we were interested in one question, and it's not an easy one. So we asked ourselves, what are the women's key considerations when deciding whether to go on a postdoc in physics, and in what way are they influenced by gender? So not an easy question to answer. Just a few words about the Israeli context. It's different from the American in a way. So I guess you all know that physics is characterized by gender imbalance worldwide, almost worldwide, let's say, in the Western democracies for at least. And also in Israel, and when you look at the numbers in Israel at the high school level, we have 38% of the pupils who choose to study physics that are female, which is very nice. But then it drops down quite dramatically when we get to the academy. So we have in Israel bachelor degree, master's degree, and then PhD. And along the last decade, it stays about the same 18%. So 18% women. So 1 in 6 physics students in the Israeli academy are female. So we start very low. And then it's dropped down again when we get into the academic stuff. So only 7% of our staff within the physics faculty in Israel are female. And when we're talking about a career in academy in physics, we were focused in this research in 2 decision junctions. The first junction is choosing to get into physics in academy level. So it would be in the beginning of the bachelor degree, and the next stage will be at after PhD, deciding to go on a postdoc, which means that you're interested to pursue an academic career. And in Israel, since we're a very small country, we have to leave the country. So the postdoc has to be done abroad. And this is a big challenge. So I won't get into detail to our methodology, but what we did is a combination of an interdisciplinary approach and a mixed methodology. So we combined a very big nationwide survey within all the PhD students in Israel, both female and male. And on top of it, we add interviews with both PhD students and postdocs, trying to understand their personal stories, and this is what I'm going to present. So if I have to give you the bottom line of our findings today, and you have only one thing you want to remember out of this presentation today, is that what we understand is that the women's decision to pursue an academic career in physics are shaped within a gendered structure, in a reality that reduces their freedom of choice and raises the perceived price of pursuing a postdoctoral training abroad. And another important point to remember is that women feel that they must excel in order to pursue this kind of career. So I get into details as much as the time enables me. So we try to look at 4 different levels of influence on this young female's life. The first one is the organizational and family level. So if we're talking about organization, we have to also speak before that about the structure or the context of Israel. So Israel is a very familiar society. We love children. We are doing a lot of children. And most of our students are already married during their PhD studies. So between 63 to 70% of our students are already married, and 40% have small children. So having small children, as you all know, it's a double burden. And we asked our students who is responsible for the childcare. So having your PhD in parallel to having children could be a lot of burden on a person or on a student. And what we find here is that even though most of the young PhD students try to combine and to help each other, 57% of the female, but only 5% of the male students are the primary child caregivers. So we can see very quickly in the research that women are having much more burden of childcare, and you can see the influence on all other aspects of their lives. I won't get into details a lot to the interview. I'll choose few quotes from the interview. So one of them is this, from a married student that already have a girl, and she's pregnant, and she said, "I feel the gender difference mainly from having far fewer hours to work than my friends from the lab. And it becomes a tough gap. You're competing against them, and the comparison is always between you and a man who does not have this problem of childcare." The other aspect that we find is that women are facing much more discrimination on different bases. As you can see here, when you compare male and female, 63% of the female said that they were facing discrimination based on gender or pregnancy and parenthood during their academic studies. And on top of it, we can also see a more hard way of gender relations or power relation, which is sexual harassment. So also 21% of our students, female, said that they were facing any kind of sexual harassment during their studies. So all in all, it's not just that family work places double burden on female students. We can also see that the extra hurdles that they are facing, both in regarding discrimination, sexual harassment, and what we see that in the competition against their male colleagues, being a mother is perceived as a disadvantage. So motherhood, we found, like in many other studies in the social sciences, moves women in physics away from the ideal worker model and labels them as less career committed. The other aspect that we looked at was within the individual level, so more the family and relationship level within the couples. One of the question was about the experience of women within the family. And we find that a lot of women are internalizing the roles of the gender labor market. And it's created a reality that they give priority and preferences to their husband career. So when you need to consider whether you want to pursue an academic career, whether you want to leave the country and go for a postdoc, they give more weight to their husband career. And we can see it here. We ask both female and male the same question about the consideration for a postdoc, going on a postdoc abroad. And as you can see here, women give greater weight to the consideration of their spouse career. So they are more concerned if their spouse will be harmed in a way regarding his employment possibilities, or they are more concerned about putting the spouse career on hold. And that influenced their decision to go on a postdoc abroad. And it was all over also in the interviews. So prioritizing the husband career is constraining women options and pushes some of them out of the race towards an academic career in physics. And we saw along the interviews, some of them decided to leave the race and move to the industry and find work in another place, not within the academy. Another level that we looked at was the sociological level, or the social norms. So one of the things that we find in the interviews is that the academic career path is not only demanding, but it's also being conceived as a path that is not for women. So although most of those women were coming from a high socioeconomic background, the social and the family environment of many of them perceived the postdoc abroad as a non-normative path for women. And the last important point that we find is that what we call in sociology the justification regime. So women feel that they must be excellent students with high probability to success to justify the choice of a non-normative career trajectory. So if you're not excellent, meaning you have a brilliant thesis, you received few prizes, and your mentor really supports you to go on a postdoc, to continue within this path, you will leave the race. So this is what we call a justification regime of excellence. And it leaves a lot of women deciding not to continue to an academic career. So to wrap up, I would say a few things. First of all, I think that what we see in this research, that through the women's stories, is the multiple and hidden ways in which gender operates as a power structure within the family, in physics as a male-dominated field, and within the labor market. And this power structure shapes women's decision and behavior. The other thing that we find very important, that women put the bar higher for themselves. So again, it's another mechanism that prevents women to pursue an academic career in physics. And as for opportunities, because we are talking about it, opportunities, so I think along the last 8 years, Yossi and myself, we are involved both in the European level, in the national level, and within our institution in initiative when we try to use the knowledge and the the understanding that we gain from the research to initiate new programs to enhance women in physics. So one of them is invest in efforts to create an inclusive culture within the physics department, is to be more diverse in enlisting new students into the institution, to give mentoring and support to young students and early career scholars. And we're doing all kind of things. I don't have the time to get into it, but trying to implement our knowledge into initiative within the institution, and hopefully we'll succeed with time. So thank you.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to maybe in the question period to thinking about what some of those programs and policies might look like. Our next speakers are Shawna Vican, who is an assistant professor of sociology and criminal justice at the University of Delaware. Her research explores forms of workplace gender inequality, how organizations interpret and respond to social problems, and the effectiveness of organizational policies and practices that aim to promote DEI. She is also the Associate Director of the University of Delaware Advance Institute, which was founded through an NSF Institutional Transformation Grant. The Institute's broad aims are to diversify and strengthen University of Delaware's faculty, as well as to foster positive departmental climates. Her co-author is Robin Andreasen, Professor and Chair of Linguistics and Cognitive Science at the University of Delaware. She earned her PhD in philosophy and specializes in feminist theory, philosophy of science, and the advancement of women and other minoritized groups in science. She's also the co-director of University of Delaware's Advanced Institute. Let's welcome them.
Right. Well, kudos to the program organizers for pairing these two papers. What I'll be talking about in this paper is very much an extension of some of the themes that we just spoke about with the experiences of female students in physics. So we'll be looking a little bit later in the career trajectory, thinking about female academics, in particular motherhood and academic careers. So, as we probably all know at this point, we see persistent rates of underrepresentation for women in STEM. I won't go through all of the many mechanisms at play, right? We have a pretty broad social science literature that tells us things like implicit bias are important, chilly climate, sexual harassment, overt hostility, lack of access to networks, right, to mentors and sponsors. All of these things help us explain in part, right, why we see fewer women in STEM careers. What I want to talk about today is that gender isn't entirely the story here. Sociologists and social psychologists have increasingly focused on how mothers in particular face distinct barriers in the workplace. So we know since the 1970s there's been rapid increases in women's labor force participation, but changes within the family really haven't kept pace with changes in the workplace. So mothers still spend many more hours on things like childcare and household responsibilities than do fathers, and workplaces are still designed for that 1950s model where you have a breadwinner father that has few family commitments, right, and can devote himself entirely to the workplace. We actually see growing overwork premiums in the US, which I think is kind of interesting, where individuals that work long work hours, 50 plus hours per week, see salary gains, right, when you look at sort of their per hour earnings, in excess of what people that work a more standard hour see. So we see that in law, we see that in finance, and I would argue we also see that overwork premium in fields like academia. So part of what's going on here, obviously, is it's difficult to juggle caregiving responsibilities with these work expectations, particularly these ideal worker norms that expect long work hours and single-minded commitment. And we know from the research, in fact, that parenthood is a key factor in women leaving STEM jobs, and women are twice as likely to leave STEM jobs after they become a mother than our fathers, right? So clear gender differences there. But we also see the importance of not just the challenges in balancing family commitments and work commitments, but the fact that we can think about motherhood as a social status, right, as a status characteristic. And what that means is that we hold these broad-based beliefs around what mothers are like, right? They are warm and nurturing, right? And we also implicitly have this status hierarchy that affords men, on average in the US, greater status than women. And mothers really don't end up at the top of this status hierarchy as well. So we can think about this causing things like implicit bias within the workplace simply through mothers' status, right? And assumptions that they are perhaps less committed in the workplace and less competent in the workplace as well. So today I'm going to talk specifically around women within academic STEM careers. I would expect the patterns that I'll talk about would be quite similar in broader STEM fields, but the nature of the academic career model is such that I think it really heightens these effects. We can think about academic careers as kind of a winner-take-all system, right? You sort of land you do your postdoc, you land your tenure-track job, and then you have this very small window of time in which you're trying to be as research productive as possible, to publish as much. And this happens often at the same time that women are in sort of their prime childbearing years as well, right? So you have this time crunch. You also have this kind of biological reality, right, that it is the same time you're having a family. And so, you know, when it comes to academic motherhood, there are kind of multiple ways in which having children can lead women to face career penalties. So we see that mothers are actually less likely to even secure tenure-track positions. They're much more likely to have more contingent roles, adjunct faculty roles, just non-tenure roles within the academy. Research suggests that mothers, while working extremely long work hours and spending more time on teaching and service, actually have somewhat fewer hours to spend on research. And I would say the evidence is mixed, but we see some evidence that there's a little bit of a productivity gap when we think about publishing as well. So in addition to kind of these career implications, mothers within academia report much higher levels of stress than do academic fathers. And they perceive that their colleagues don't view them as competent scientists, right? Or that they have to work harder to be perceived as doing good work. And interestingly enough, just as motherhood impacts career outcomes, we can see the flip, right? That sometimes career outcomes can have some effect on family as well. So female academics are much more likely to delay family formation, right? To try to wait until maybe they secure tenure before they have families. And they're much more likely than academic fathers to report that they didn't have as many children or have sort of the family that they had envisioned ideally, in part because of these pressures that they're facing. So women's persistent underrepresentation within the academy has been well documented, right? We've been trying to tackle this problem for many, many years. And the challenges in particular combining parenthood and faculty roles, have been well documented. About 20 years ago, the American Association of University Professors, the AAUP, formally began to advocate for universities to adopt policies to help faculty combine their work responsibilities with having a family life. And in the time since, many universities have begun to adopt some of these policies. For the purposes of time, I won't go through all of them today, but I have put up just a handful of what's out there. On the left, we can think about policies and practices that are really designed to accommodate kind of that intense period of time around the birth or adoption of a child. So things like parental leave, stop the clock policies, and workload adjustments. And then on the right, kind of more broad caregiving supports, things like having an on-site child care center, backup dependent care. What's important to note is that there's a lot of variability in how universities are implementing these policies. And this will be part of the story in just a couple of minutes, that as we're trying to assess what are the most promising policies to promote gender equity, right, and to help academic mothers, it's very difficult, right, as a researcher to disentangle what works and what doesn't when the ways in which the policies are implemented vary from institution to institution. Just to give you a sense, though, with what's most common, the United States stands relatively alone in the world for not having paid family leave. All we have is the Family Medical Leave Act, which grants us 12 weeks, or some of us, right, that are at covered employers, 12 weeks of unpaid leave, job-protected leave right after having a child. Some universities have adopted more generous benefits and provide family leave that's in excess of the FMLA. That's still less than 50%, right, of institutions. A larger proportion offers stop the clock, where faculty can actually get 1 extra year on their tenure clock, to kind of account for the fact that when you have a child, right, you're going to be doing a lot of other things beyond your research, right? So that gives them a bit of extra time to kind of make up for that. And then workload adjustments are another piece of the puzzle. They're relatively less common on the formal side, but quite a few schools report having at least an informal or an ad hoc way for faculty to kind of shift around their workload. Maybe they take a semester where they're not teaching around when they have a child, right? But they're still expected to do some aspects of their faculty role. The other piece of the puzzle with child care centers is just to provide perhaps priority placement for faculty children in these centers, maybe subsidized care in these on-campus centers. And the last two policies, backup dependent care and travel grants, are relatively new and relatively rare. We don't yet have much research, right, on their efficacy as well. So if we ask, okay, these are sort of the main policies that we see. To what extent do these policies work? There haven't been many studies about child care benefits. There's more research on parental leave and stopping the clock. One thing I want to talk about is that we can't just look at the availability of policies. We know, in fact, that there are very low usage rates. So a lot of schools might offer things, but faculty don't feel very comfortable, in particular mothers don't feel very comfortable actually making use of these things, right? We talk about this as a type of bias avoidance, or a strategy to sort of reduce or downplay your family commitments because you fear anticipated career penalties, right? You don't want your colleagues to view you as less of a scientist because you're using these benefits. And then again, I mentioned implementation varies. So when we think about something like a stop the clock policy, the research is pretty mixed as to whether these policies work. Some suggest that stop the clock policies lead to higher tenure rates for female faculty. A more recent study looking specifically at economists actually finds that at universities that adopt stop the clock in a gender-neutral fashion, we see fewer women getting tenure and more men getting tenure, with the expectation there that perhaps men are not actually doing much caregiving when they're stopping the clock, but they're using that extra time to up their research productivity, right? So some things to keep in mind as we think about implementing these policies. Then just in my last minute or two, I do want to talk about some persistent barriers, right? So as an organizational scholar, I certainly advocate for the adoption of these policies, but we can't expect to see broad-scale change unless we address some of these broader barriers. The first is ideal worker norms, as we talked about just a moment ago in the previous talk. Certainly, this expectation that workers are always on, that are answering their emails in the middle of the night, working weekends, right? Sort of deprioritizing everything beyond work, certainly has to change, right? Just to see gender equity. And we also have gendered assumptions just built into workplaces, work policies, actual roles, right? So Joan Acker kind of famously introduced this idea of organizations as not neutral, right, but as gendered, and we certainly still see that within the academy. Pointing to the fact that ideal worker norms haven't changed, if we look at biology doctorates, tenure track women in those roles are working longer hours than their peers in both non-tenure track roles and industry jobs. So it looks like ideal worker norms are alive and well within the academy. In addition, mothers seem to be reporting that they're doing more in the workplace, but are actually being perceived by their peers and by more senior colleagues as being less committed to work, being perhaps less likely to do whatever it takes to advance their careers, right? To move for a new job, to be able to commit to extended field work, right? And so they have colleagues that at least are questioning whether they are not only competent in the workplace, but actually committed to science as well. Just to wrap up, I do want to talk for a moment about possible solutions. The research suggests that institutional context matters quite a lot, right? So we see policies work better at organizations that are more feminized in general. Within the academic context, having a supportive chair seems to mean that faculty feel more comfortable making use of these policies. And then when you have senior leaders and senior administrators within institutions talking about these policies, communicating these policies, it gives them legitimacy and it makes people feel more comfortable actually making use of them. And then I do want to also just mention that this is kind of a win-win. So we do a lot of policy advocacy work through Advance, and we always pitch these things as not only important for sort of the inclusive academy, right, and for doing better science, but faculty that perceive their institution as committed to work and family are actually more satisfied, they're more likely to stay. I would argue we probably see lower rates of turnover. And so, if you create this environment within your institution that can allow faculty to combine motherhood and work, where you're also going to see some gains and some benefits to the university itself. I'd be happy, if you have any questions, we can talk later after the presentation. Feel free to email me as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Having lived through the motherhood, and I'm currently living on call, waiting for a colleague to have her baby, and the moment she does, I'm going to start covering her 2 classes. I continue to be interested in these questions. Our next talk is from Dr. Tamar Goulet, who joined the University of Mississippi in 2001, where she is currently a professor of biology. She is also an American Association for the Advancement of Science, if-then ambassador. And she looks at how environmental problems affect coral reefs, the organisms living there, and how the creatures cope. Along the way, her goal is to be a role model to inspire young women to pursue a career they want. With a 30-year perspective, Dr. Goulet's work includes innovation in biology, pedagogy, research on women's careers, in addition to facilitating learning through teaching, innovation, and mentorship. She is published in both the scientific literature and the mass media, and finds that teaching science to non-scientists, from the popular press to seminars, is both challenging and rewarding. Let's welcome her.
Thank you. So First, I'd like to give a shout out for the AAAS If Then Ambassadorship Program. There was a presentation earlier today about the 500 women. The AAAS If Then Ambassadorship, in conjunction with Lyda Hill Philanthropies, chose 125 women nationally across all STEM fields to be role models, particularly for middle school age girls. They also created media dossiers and to make the women available for interviews. And they also surprised us and made 3D full-size statues of us. And those have been phenomenal. They were on display in the Smithsonian in March. And it was very impressive to see those statues and to have people walk. And we stood by our statues. And the reaction of the public was amazing, from women actually crying to talking about environmental issues in relation to my project and so forth. And we have another ambassador that presented here today. And now that the statues have wrapped up, besides my children saying that I should put mine in my front lawn, if you know a museum that would be interested in a statue shipped for them for free, please let me know before it's shipped to my home address, okay? So that is the AAAS, and the work that I am presenting today was funded by an ALDA Center for Communicating Science and Women in STEM Leadership grant, and after attending their program. So we're here in part for the Pursuit and Persistence 300 Years of Women in Science, and I would say that the women have persisted and pursued in spite of and despite of the multiple hurdles that they constantly face. And those hurdles have not ended or, were just historical. They are continuing today. My talk is not a gripe fest, but it is an opportunity to potentially highlight something that non-academic institutions can potentially do to help with some of the issues. In regards to gender, there was a very cool article that was written in Nature in 2006 by Ben Bars, and it came at after a year of Harvard University President Larry Summers suggested that the differences in innate aptitude rather than discrimination were more likely to blame for having less women in STEM. And I'll just show you two quotes that he said. He wrote, "People who don't know I am transgendered treat me with much more respect. I can even complete a whole sentence without being interrupted by a man." And he also wrote, "Shortly after I changed sex, a faculty member was heard to say, 'Ben Bars gave a great seminar today, but then his work is much better than his sister's.'" So that was a unique perspective on the challenges that women face in the sciences. And then the American Association of University Professors, this is a report from 2019-20, and the reason that I put it up here is at the beginning of that, they say, that this has not budged in the last 10 years. And what they show, which has been mentioned here previously, so I'll just quickly, women are more represented in the non-tenure track in academia. And then as far as the full professor rank, their numbers go down dramatically, and it goes down dramatically throughout. And then the other thing which goes unfortunately hand in hand with that is that women in academia earn less than their male counterparts, and the gap of earning increases as the woman goes up in ranks. So full professors on average earn $20,000, female full professors less than men do. So people have mentioned the leaky pipeline, and the idea behind that is that even from middle school, right, or before that even, there is attrition of women into the STEM fields, and then that attrition continues and continues with numbers going down and down, right? And so one of the things, right, the theme of this is women in science opportunities. And I'm going to talk about a hurdle, but then I'm going to suggest a potential solution to that hurdle. So I took information from the American Philosophical Society, but this is relevant to any of the societies. So, for example, there's the Lewis and Clark Fund for Exploration of Field Research, which I was very excited about because it shows corals, and I'm a coral reef biologist. This particular one, the eligibility is just for doctoral students. And that's important because you want to have women succeed and move up the ranks. And then yesterday we saw a really amazing play about Emily and all her amazing contributions. She was a self-funded scholar, if you will, right? And a theoretician, although she did, anyway, the point is whether she would have gotten tenure or not is debatable in the time frame that it takes to get tenure, right? Not in terms of her accomplishments. So then you can understand the concern of having women graduate and then having women get tenure. And so, for example, another grant that I found, the Franklin Research Grant, that one has a particular focus on particularly interested in supporting the work of young scholars who have recently received the doctorate. So you can understand that. And so we've spoken, and other people have spoken in this session and previous sessions about disparities and hardships for women. But I'm going to introduce you to the fact that also within women, you have various issues. And I'm not even talking about different ethnicities and different backgrounds, but I'm talking about different career development stages. So in 1999, there was a very famous study from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and part of that study found that junior women faculty felt well supported by their departments. Now, whether they're supported when they have children and so forth, that's another factor, but they did not believe that gender bias will impact their careers. On the other hand, tenured women faculty felt marginalized. They felt excluded from a significant role in their departments. And I do want to quote the chair of the MIT faculty wrote introductory remarks to the report that was published. It is available online. And he said, our first instinct is to deny that a problem exists. If it existed, it would surely have been solved by now, or to blame it on the pipeline or the circumstances and choices of individual women. None of these, however, explains the inequities surfaced by the committee. And then the other thing is, as the senior women careers advanced, something else besides competence came into play, which for them meant an accumulation of slight disadvantages was just the opposite for their male colleagues. So it's not just about getting tenure, it's about surviving after you do get tenure. And that has been shown several times, like the American Association of University Women published a book, Why So Few, and women after tenure, right? They made it. They're still leaving as well. This was published in 1999, so that's over 30 years ago. It still goes on. So the Sachs Institute is a public research institute in California. This was a New York Times article that talked about a lawsuit that the senior women were putting against Sachs. And you see the same theme, right? So one of the women was quoted as saying, senior women were secondary. They weren't consulted. They weren't invited into joint grants. They weren't in the leadership. And if you thought that was recent, in the beginning of 2023, there was a news report of a report that came out from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, which is a private oceanography institution. Women scientists have half the lab space of men. And as faculty gained more funding, space assignments for men grew at 4 times the rate than women's did. And increasing in funding is usually also coincide with a woman's advancement in her career. And as the size of their research group grew, men's research space expanded at nearly double the rate of women's. So to sum up here, in going back to the 1999 study, there is a marginalization of senior women as women progress through from assistant to associate and more harshly in the full professor rank. And that marginalization is accompanied by women receiving less salary, receiving less space, receiving less awards, less resources, and less response to outside offers. That's what the report said. And then despite the professional accomplishments of these women, so these women are not less meritorious than their male peers. And the other thing, which they published in 1999, which was repeated again, echoed in the New York Times article quoting the women, which is echoed yet again, the pattern repeats itself in successive generations of women faculty. Okay? And so one of the things that I'd like to highlight and talk about is awards. So this is a great session because it kind of builds into exactly what I'm trying to say, and that is that institutions have a lot to say about dealing with these inequities, right? So we're not going to solve that right now, but in regards to institutions are the ones that decide salary, they're the ones that decide space, they're the ones potentially that decide resources, but one thing that they do not control is awards. And you can maybe argue that if a woman doesn't have the resources, then she might not get the funding, but the external agencies are the ones that get the funding. So what I would like to say right now is that a lot of the grants, fellowships, and scholarships, including the ones that I showed you from this society, are limited. And whether they are limited for men and women or for women only, they are either for under 35, up to 10 years post-PhD, pre-tenure, or up to mid-career. And if you think about it, it adversely affects women more than men, even if it is just for women, that particular grant. And the reason for that is that, first of all, up to 10 years post-PhD, a woman's research, although, in order to get tenure, one needs to produce, but it may not take off if a woman is either having children or is taking care of family members. And so it's not just about having children. And as COVID pandemic illustrated, you have, women disproportionately burden of taking care of family. So that may not work. And then the pre-tenure women may be just focused on not sleeping through the night potentially, and getting the amount of publications and grants that they need to get in order to get tenure, let alone go beyond that and get an award, or they may not have that many. And also the other thing is they may not have a lot of collaborations. Travel is much, although there are now potentially daycare facilities at conferences, that's relatively new. And so if a woman has young children, or if she's taking care of an elderly parent, the travel and this is before Zoom kind of, you needed to actually go somewhere to collaborate with people. And so all of that penalizes people. And the one thing that I'll say about the mid-career, so for example, the only grant that I found that was mid-career focused was from the NSF. And then the NSF, though, their mid-career definition is associate professor. And then this year, they broadened it to full professors, but only in primarily undergraduate institutions. And so they're limiting it, so women that are in non-undergraduate, primarily undergraduate research institutions cannot apply to that. And not only that, but this grant calls for the woman going to another university to learn new skills, which makes sense. But if you have small children, you're not going to go away for 3 months to learn, or 4, to learn new skills unless you can move your whole family with you. So to summarize, we can't potentially fix the world today, but one of the things that is important, especially for organizations, and I have looked, if anybody knows of any fellowship or grant that is for a senior woman in STEM, please let me know. Because I have looked both in societies, the American Association of University Women, L'Oreal has a Young Investigator Award for women, American Association for the Advancement of Science. I can go on and on. It's all for young faculty. When a woman arrives at being a full professor, and of course it depends when she started, but let's even say she's 50 or so, she has a lot to contribute She's not dead. But if she cannot get the external recognition, so the universities can argue that she's less meritorious, but if she gets external recognition, and it doesn't matter if it's, it doesn't have to be $1 million grant, but if the American Philosophical Society gives her a grant, and then the PR department runs a story on it, it's harder to say that women are less meritorious. And not only that, but it may provide the funds to jumpstart yet another project and then go for the bigger research money. And so agencies need to be aware of that and we have been focused, and there were a lot of talks today, and it's very important to encourage young minds to go into science, right? But then there was also talk of role models. Well, if you see nobody at the top or very few at the top because they just walk away in disgust and they give up because they've been discriminated against, retaliated against, marginalized, and they have no lifeline, they need to be supported as well. Thank you.
Thank you. One of my favorite lines from that book, Why So Few, says that people say you shouldn't make a mountain out of molehills, right? But mountains indeed are made out of a whole bunch of molehills stacked up. So thank you for bringing our attention to this. Our next talk is from Amy Sue Bix, who is a professor of history at Iowa State University. Her 2013 book, Girls Coming to Tech, A History of American Engineering Education for Women from MIT Press, has won a number of major awards, including the 2015 Margaret Rossiter Prize from the History of Science Society. Bix has written widely on many topics in the history of science, technology, and medicine, including her book, Inventing Ourselves Out of Jobs, America's Debate Over Technological Unemployment, 1929 to 1981. Her book in progress is Recruiting Engineer Jane and Astrophysicist Amy, American STEM Advocacy for Girls, 1965 to 2023, and this is added to the stack of books sitting by my bed to read, and I'm looking forward to adding this one too. Thanks so much, Amy.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And as it turns out, my talk really had some very nice resonances with Tamar, so I think this is going to be fun. In 2015, the White House held its 5th annual science fair with the theme of diversity and inclusion in STEM. President Barack Obama told attendees, "We get the most out of all our nation's talent reaching out to boys and girls of all races and all backgrounds. Science is for all of us, and we want our classrooms, labs, workplaces, and media to reflect that." The president's declaration sounded unremarkable. By 2015, other national leaders, educators, scientists, and engineers also repeatedly announced a desire to welcome all youngsters. But just 50 years before, the idea of STEM for all of us on equal terms was remote. Mid-century schools, professional groups, and pop culture encouraged white boys to become elite scientists and engineers while steering other children away. Young women were generally discouraged from anything but low-status support positions. The ambitious few who persisted faced daunting opposition. Up to World War II and beyond, women who sought engineering degrees were perceived as oddities, invaders who trampled the presumed link between masculinity and engineering. Any notion of educators and parents guiding more girls into engineering would have struck most Americans as bizarre. In the 1950s, women comprised less than 1% of U.S. engineers. Cold War politics reinforced coding of science and engineering as masculine territory. One 1966 recruiting ad pictured a young boy building a computer while an admiring girl asked, "Have you always been a genius?" In 1955, Penn State University's Dean of Engineering, Eric Walker, declared, "Women are not for engineering." 1959's Webster's Elementary Dictionary literally defined engineer as male, a man who is skilled in engineering in the Army and Navy, a man constructing bridges, forts, and taking care of machinery. As Margaret Rossiter and others have detailed, post-World War II women in science advocated for each other and new generations by building networks of academic, personal, and financial support. The small but growing Society of Women Engineers, created in 1952, urged the public, high school staff, parents, and students to consider engineering as a good option for women. But wider transformation needed the catalyst of broader political and social changes in American life. Late 60s feminists challenged what they saw as inappropriate stereotyping, including junior high textbooks where girls are illustrated as timid observers while boys execute the experiments. SWE created alternate models, publishing Betsy and Robbie, about a girl fascinated with a robot designed by female engineers, and Terry's Trip, about a girl who visited her aunt's workplace and announced, "Someday I'll be an engineer like Aunt Jennifer." Policy changes, including 1972's Title IX, moved toward making discrimination based on sex illegal. The NSF and AAAS created programs to study and address issues for women in science. Number of women earning STEM credentials rose significantly in the 1970s. In 1966, just 146 women nationwide completed bachelor's degrees in engineering. In 1980, almost 6,000 did. More women scientists and engineers became college faculty and administrators, many joining male allies in starting campus chapters of SWE and groups for women in science. By the 1990s, advocacy for girls in STEM had become mainstream, linked to wider discussions of sexism's toll on young women in the AAUW's influential 1992 report, How Schools Shortchange Girls, plus bestsellers In a Different Voice, Reviving Ophelia, and Schoolgirls. Pop culture organizations such as New Moon called for empowering young women, while Girls STEM gained visibility by teaming with established organizations. In 1985, Girls Inc. developed Operation SMART, Science, Math, and Relevant Technology, which reached 500,000 girls by 2000. The Girl Scouts sent troops to national science fairs, created girls' robotics teams, and partnered with universities and Philadelphia's Franklin Institute to promote new merit badges in computers and nature studies. By the 2000s, an ever-widening range of summer camps, after-school programs, and websites encouraged girls to explore oceanography, design virtual race cars, and more. The NSF funded Adventures of Josie True, an online science math time travel game starring a Chinese-American girl, plus Talk to Me, a book about a teen girl building an artificial intelligence cat. By 2012, female graduates claimed just over 50% of all U.S. STEM bachelor's degrees, including 58% in biology. But earlier gains in female engineering degrees had leveled off, stuck around 20%. Concerned observers also noticed a severe gender imbalance in computer science, where just 18% of U.S. bachelor's degrees went to women in 2012, sharply down from 37% in 1985. New organizations created special classes, mentorships, and scholarships to immerse girls in programming, Girls Teaching Girls to Code, Technologicas, and Black Girls Code. The largest initiative, Girls Who Code, started in 2012, and 4 years later ran coding clubs for over 10,000 young women in 42 states, with backing from General Electric, AT&T, and other major donors. Such corporate support helped make Girls STEM outreach a regular feature in 21st century business and politics. President Barack Obama's new White House Council on Women and Girls repeatedly emphasized the importance of closing opportunity gaps in STEM, especially for young women of color. Obama himself used the line, "It's hard to be what you can't see." NASA, the Energy Department, and other federal agencies created websites, programs, videos, and speakers outreach promoting women in STEM. In 2010, Obama launched Change the Equation, a CEO-led effort at inspiring student excitement for STEM, especially among women and underrepresented minorities. Executives from Intel, Xerox, and almost 100 other firms supported the initiative, linking girls' STEM to concerns about national economic competitiveness in a high-tech age. 60 years earlier, the Cold War had brought warnings that poor STEM training endangered the country, but the new element was focusing on diversity. At a 2011 Facebook town hall, There we are. At a 2011 Facebook town hall, Obama declared, "Every time I come to Silicon Valley, I always hear, we can't find enough engineers, we can't find enough programmers. That's why we're emphasizing teaching girls math and science." Neoliberal ideas of efficiency fed into Obama-era themes of national economic competitiveness following the 2008 financial collapse, along with the growing influence of Silicon Valley in politics. Girls' STEM advocacy was also a personal fit for Obama, a self-proclaimed science nerd. As a declared feminist, Obama said he and Michelle wanted their daughters to keep studying science, saying, "We're not going to succeed if we got half the team on the bench, especially when it's the smarter half of the team." A powerful image from the 2014 White House Hour of Code showed Obama exchanging a fist bump with a black middle school girl who helped him become the first US president to write a line of programming. Donald Trump's polarizing election in 2016 immediately raised frictions regarding girls' STEM advocacy. Girls Who Code founder Reshma Saujani reported that first daughter Ivanka Trump quickly invited her to join a Trump computer education plan. But after Trump's travel ban policy, Saujani rejected that overture as insulting to her Muslim and immigrant colleagues. Ivanka Trump quickly became visible in advocating for girls' STEM, visiting coding classes and innovation centers, which she linked to female entrepreneurship and empowerment. Just as Barack and Michelle Obama had referenced Sasha and Malia, Ivanka cited her 5-year-old daughter as inspiration. Ivanka's social media announced she was learning to code with Arabella tonight, #WomenInSTEM. Ivanka publicly advocated for girls' STEM education, speaking at a Women's History Month celebration. Speaking at a Women's History Month celebration at the National Air and Space Museum. But critics labeled the event hypocritical, given that the president had just proposed eliminating NASA's Office of Education, which prepared curricula, ran space camps, and ran science fairs. Trump's budget slashes to science and education alarmed many observers, along with his withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. About 1 million researchers, teachers, and ordinary citizens joined 2017's March for Science in 600 cities worldwide, which included young women carrying signs reading, "Girls just want to do science." Such tensions fueled new skepticism of Ivanka's advocacy. Stephen Colbert mocked her Twitter post about visiting an Iowa chemistry class by saying, "Ivanka Trump is playing a scientific Barbie. Just like a real Barbie, she has no scientific credentials, and the space where her heart should be is a hollow plastic shell." A resulting backlash against the backlash denounced the ridicule as sexist. The polarizing of public sentiment generated by the Trump presidency made even a fairly standard political photo op promoting girls' STEM into a lightning rod for controversy. Obama's administration had promoted STEM diversity as vital to national competitiveness, but also spoke about eliminating structural biases in science. In the Trump administration, appeals to social justice did not work. But given how quickly Trump overturned many Obama-era ideas, it was striking that girls' STEM advocacy had acquired enough political and cultural capital to survive DC upheaval. Under the vague but compelling missions of female empowerment and economic competitiveness, figures as politically far apart as Ivanka Trump and Reshma Saujani could equally proclaim a dedication to girls' STEM. Girls' STEM advocacy let corporations make common cause with both the Obama and Trump administration. Girls' STEM became a fashionable aim, leveraged to mesh with business rhetoric of diversity and innovation. Girls Who Code listed over 130 Girls Who Code listed over 130 corporate partners, from Adobe, Amazon, AT&T, to Uber, Viacom, and Walmart, plus women-oriented businesses Eileen Fisher, Sephora, and Estee Lauder. Pouring millions of dollars into girls' tech advocacy yielded appealing public relations images, plus branding opportunities. Apple's Kids Coding Sessions required parents to sit through marketing promotions. Disney created programming tutorials featuring Princess Leia and Rey from Star Wars. I'm a historian of technology. You can't deal with technology. Okay, Disney created programming tutorials featuring Princess Leia and Rey from Star Wars and Moana in 2016, coordinating with each film's release. Partner Code.org declared, "We were particularly excited that these beloved tutorials featured strong female characters, which helped the Hour of Code introduce female students around the world to computer science. Thank you to Disney." Even as leading tech companies rush to support girls in STEM, current female employees pointed to discrimination and harassment. Firms insisted they wanted to hire more women, but just couldn't find enough. A 2016 survey of over 200 women in tech showed that 60% had experienced unwanted sexual advances and 87% heard put-downs from male coworkers. Research showed that the real problem was a huge dropout rate of current female employees in Silicon Valley. Over time, fully 52% of qualified females quit their jobs, driven out by hostile work environments, macho culture, isolation, and extreme work pressures. Through STEM outreach to K-12 girls, tech corporations that had poor records of retaining and promoting adult women tech workers could pivot and win praise. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella made headlines by telling women who don't ask for raises to trust in good karma for eventual compensation. Meanwhile, Microsoft funded DigiGirls high-tech camps and a girls' STEM documentary film and created videos to celebrate International Women's Day and Women's History Month. Such concerns do not negate the value of how much has changed over recent decades for women in U.S. science and tech. Social, cultural, and political shifts fostered passage of new laws regarding equity, while sustained, effective activism gradually yielded dramatic shifts in gendered assumptions. Individually and in groups, female scientists and engineers plus male allies, parents, teachers, and mentors poured enormous energy into encouraging girls. Campaigns have raised awareness of female underrepresentation, which remains stubbornly high in certain STEM fields. All this is a radical historic change, the mainstreaming of encouragement for interested and ambitious girls to pursue fields once primarily reserved for men. The revolution has transformed science and tech itself with a powerful new conviction of who can and should find education and career opportunities in exciting, important STEM work. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Having lived through the 1960s up to the present day, there was a lot in that I could really resonate with. But I will say that at the March in Science in Philadelphia, one of the political people there greeted the scientists and their wives. Ouch, I know. That was, 2016? It was not a good look. But I've really appreciated all the perspectives that we have from our speakers about sustaining women from the very beginning of their careers all the way through to the end. And maybe while we get organized out there, I will think about a question for all of you, which is if you could make one policy or systematic change, which do you think would be the one you would most want to make? Go for it. It's on.
It's on, okay. I would make institutions accountable for their actions. If you read the Chronicle of Higher Ed, Science, all these other places, time and time again, they have offices, but they ignore complaints, they hide complaints, they bury complaints. And that's what's and also in industry, right? That's what's driving women to leave. Because and not only that, but Nancy Hopkins, who was one of the instigators of the MIT study, she showed the data, and the data was ignored. And it took one other person, who happened to be a guy, to take it seriously. Women's equity should not rely, and their success in STEM, should not rely on one guy doing the right thing. It has to be institutional change, and institutions will not change out of the goodness of their heart. They will change if they are penalized for not changing. And so, for example, I don't know if you're aware of this, but NSF and NIH have policies for sexual discrimination and harassment, and they're very serious about protecting people. But the underlying assumption of both agencies and other agencies is that the PI, a male PI, is the problem, or a woman PI is the problem. And so they refer to the institution to do the investigation. And then if the institution does a dummy investigation, there is no place to report that the investigation was a cover-up. The assumption is that the PI is the bad apple, but the university is going to do the right thing. The same thing with their research misconduct policies. The assumption is the PI is the problem, and then they tell the Office of Research to do the investigation. What if the Office of Research is the problem? There is no way to deal with it. And so unless there is institutional change, not just in opening an office and putting a sign on the door, but actually action, it's not going to move forward. That's my opinion, right? It's not going to move forward.
That's beautifully put, and I'd broaden it out even more. I mean, what you said is absolutely important, but I guess from my perspective, what I would like to see is not so much just talking about women in STEM, as important as that is, but embedding it within the broader context of women and gender in American society overall. Because as you were saying earlier, the United States really is mind-bogglingly unique in a bad way in terms of not having decent support for childcare and working parents. And so more of a conversation about that, not just talking about how it affects women in STEM, but talking about it as a national problem, talking about the national challenges for single parents, the economic inequality in this country, lack of access to education. So, you know, I think asking about women in STEM is a great starting point, but for me, what I would change wouldn't be something specific to women in STEM, it would be women in the wider context of the United States overall. And of course, it's worth noting, you know, my talk was focused just on the US, you know, as our colleagues from Israel have said, has reminded us, this is a global issue, and while patterns vary by nation, there are in fact important parallels and issues to look at globally. And again, we just don't have time to talk about all that here. It needs to be part of the bigger conversation.
Yeah, no, I think in some ways it's just the canary in the coal mine. And my niece picked up and moved from San Francisco to Norway when they were expecting their first child, and that had everything to do with maternity policies.
Yeah, so in Israel we have a program now that connects funding to promoting better gender balance in the academy, and each institute has to define their own plan. So we think that the best is the institute works on it. It's not defined from above, but the institute itself knows what the problems are, and they define the plan. There is a committee, I happen to be a member in that committee, that looks at these plans and comments whether they are not ambitious enough or not well defined enough. But in general, we accept that different institutes have different character, and the way to improve the situation should be allowed to be different from each other. And if the plan is satisfactory and then it's implemented, then they get extra funding to what they would have gotten otherwise. So that's one of the answers. The other thing is, it's not just related to policies. So the questions that we talked about, like that the burden of childcare and the burden of household is mainly on women, that's a societal problem. So I think much more education, much more awareness on the male side of the society of these. It cannot be worked through, I think, a policy change. It is education, it takes time. And my third answer is that I feel that personally, I'm not a person that understands strategy. And so the first time I talked about this in CERN some 6 years ago, I gave my talk the title 1 + 1 + 1, which I think is another way of doing it. So in my own faculty of Physics at Weizmann Institute, for the first 54 years of its existence, there were 0 women in any, not even tenure track, not tenured. 54 years, they could not find even a single candidate. So I think moving from 0 to 1, and from 1 to 2, and from 2 to 3 are huge steps for a faculty, and they make a difference. So it's a question of awareness by the faculty. When I first asked about it, they'd say, tell us about a woman that is a star in physics and we missed the opportunity. And I said, that's not the right question. Have all the men that you hired along these 54 years were better than the women that you did not hire? And the answer was obviously no. There have been women candidates that could easily come into the faculty. So I think, again, making aware that this is important and hiring one and one more, and then when you have 1 or 2 or 3 role models to the female students, it makes a difference. Again, it's not just a question of policy, it's a question of society, it's a question of awareness. I think all of these have to be worked out.
It's many factors. We have a question from the floor.
Well, I'm going to make the horrible conference faux pas and provide more of a comment than a question. And not only that, it's going to be on something you didn't talk about. And so I'm hitting all of the wrongs here.
I would say that a woman making a comment rather than a question is a fabulous thing.
But it actually stems from Tamar's talk, and I love that you focused on older women or established women, different places in your career. And because that gets left out of the conversation so much. And as much as I want to support my fellow women and motherhood and children, part of what also is not being spoken is the burdens that are on single childless women and where that comes into the workplace. And it's the economists that actually started putting a dollar figure to the penalty of single women in the hours worked, specifically, people who get put into evening time slots because they don't have kids, they don't have to rush in. But not only that, the sort of double burden on when men have to leave at 3, they're like, I have to go pick up kids from school. They're like, yay, way to go, you're a great father. Whereas who is stuck at the office doing that work? And so as we have this fabulous conversation about looking to, make, more gender equity, you have to also think about who else are we leaving out of that equation and what burdens do they have. And then tied into that, talk a lot about children, less so much about elder care, and that has recently become much more personal to me as my mother moved in with me during COVID, and I'm like, ooh, this is a lot of work because she's like a 10-year-old with opinions, who wants lots of stuff. So I just leave that comment. I don't know if you guys want to respond to it in some other way. I mean, again, it's not what you talked about, but it's in the realm of what's holding women back.
It's my sugar glucose.
Something's happening.
Just to speak to the elder care point for a moment, I think when policies are implemented and crafted in a careful way, many of the things that maybe we think about covering, say, childbirth or having young children can be used for some of those other caregiving responsibilities. And I think we are increasingly seeing the generation that's sort of caregiving at both ends, where it's sort of elder care and at times young children, right? And that can be particularly difficult to balance. So I know some of the things like stop the clock, even taking modified duties, at least on our campus, we've seen for people that have, instances of other kinds of caregiving that they would be providing. But we could do it better, certainly.
Yep.
I I think, again, if we just broaden out beyond women in STEM, I think that connects to bigger questions about what's going to be happening over the next couple of decades with regard to the world of work, especially post-COVID, when so many people got used to being able to work from home, to have meetings online. You know, academia in some ways hasn't entirely adapted to that. And I think at the moment we've got a very tense situation there. But I think, you know, what could be done in terms of especially giving everyone, parents, but also people with adult care responsibilities, a bit more flexibility to teach from home, to have meetings from home. I think I hope academia will be coming to terms with that the way the rest of the work world is sort of starting to try to do now.
So I guess circling back to motherhood, the focus is on tenure track women in STEM, but what about, I guess, is there any insight on providing access for childcare, parental leave for grad students or postdocs, because they're still very much in that childbearing age?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a challenge. Many of the times when we've done policy advocacy work, it is scoped, right, to the higher status players on a campus, which unfortunately are oftentimes tenure track faculty to the exclusion of even more teaching-focused faculty, doctoral students. Certainly undergrads also have childcare needs, and in particular post-COVID, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but the cost of childcare has gone up as the availability has gone down. So I think increasingly providing some more resources is necessary to help people find a solution, right, that works. We have been trying to negotiate for more childcare centers and some backup childcare for several years, and it's been an uphill battle. So I welcome anyone that has ideas for how to.
Yeah, and I would add just that there's a difference between the types of interventions you might bring to the table for tenure track faculty have the unique, up and out problem, which is you're going to lose your job if you don't get promoted. And so that's a clock that's brutal. So that's something I had 2 kids before tenure. I still am traumatized from it. I mean, before tenure? In 6 years?
I had 5 kids that were 7 and under pre-tenure.
Yeah, okay. So a lot. The point being, I hit 2, and that was way more than I could handle. And yes, so kudos. But anyway, the point being, I think for the grad students, the postdocs, those are things that are like the childcare availability things and a lot of culture training that needs to happen. I think when the question was asked earlier, my thoughts were about culture. What's the one thing we really need to change? We need to change the whole way academic rewards are meted out and what counts as respectful research or what even a good research program is. It's all very structured around very narrow boxes. It's all H-index focused. All of that is not productive in terms of creativity. And I think it does drive out really amazing people who typically are more often in the more marginalized groups. But I think for grad students and postdocs, there's got to be training for these PIs to help them better understand and support these students as well, to help them work on work-life balance issues and those kinds of things. Unfortunately, those are the people that really fall through the cracks because the institution seems to care about the undergrads. And then the NSF is the advanced thing is the grant that we had it's faculty focused. That's where the money was, which is why we talk about faculty. And postdocs in particular are kind of this little island that really do need a lot of attention. So you're really on point. It's not an answer, but.
Yeah, I mean, this notion of the ideal worker is really the difficult piece.
Yeah, I would like to make a comment on a different issue. A comment from the panel is strange, but I'll make it anyway. So I think it was, for me, a very interesting and impressive day, a lot of initiatives I very much appreciate, but I'm very worried that only 3% of the people sitting on
right,
stage.
yes.
Only 3% are male. And it's not a woman's issue. And this day gives the impression that it is a woman's issue. And so I didn't know whether I want to sit here or not, given that I'm not giving a talk. But I thought it would be a shame. Someone has to make the statement that this is important for science. It's, for me personally, physics would benefit a lot, not just because of doubling the pool of talent, but because I'm convinced that there will be questions asked that when it's completely male-dominated, they're not asked at all. So things that I cannot imagine because I'm part of this community and this culture. But so it's in the interest of physics, in the interest of science, in the interest of academy, in the interest of society. And so I think that it's very worrisome that it remains the issue that very dominantly women deal with and not the entire society.
And that's part of the problem.
So I think that that actually is a great segue into the final segment of the day, which is going to be a conversation for all of us to kind of think through the themes that have come up during the day and talk about maybe some of the things we haven't discussed. But for now, join me in thanking our panelists for this fantastic session.